a good chat earlier on. Got a good couple of potential guests lined up for future episodes.
Teasing everybody.
Teasing the
listeners.
Exactly. Well, it's quite interesting, isn't it, to think what do people want to hear about? And we know a reasonable number of people, don't we, in business generally. And thankfully, some of them are prepared to come along on one of our podcasts.
No, I think there's some good guests lined up.
Yeah.
In the future, some interesting topics. Stay posted.
Everybody has the same sort of reaction, though, don't they? That they're sort of interested in the idea, but then immediately they go into some sort of panic of thinking, what am I going to say and how am I going to come across? And it always works okay in the end.
It's always good.
Yeah. So maybe
variety,
if someone's listening thinking,
yeah.
I think I could be on one of Dave and Rich's podcasts.
There's a very robust vetting program.
Yes, true. Well, you mean they have to bring the right type of beer along?
Exactly. But no, it should be good. Some good episodes coming up, I think. Interesting topics and interesting people. Yeah. Some good experts lined up.
Well, I think we've got a good one lined up for today then, but no guests. It's
no
just
guests.
us.
Yeah. And we can see when people drop off listening, so we'll know.
Yes, we know who you are. If you start listening, then don't listen anymore. All right, let's do today's one then.
Cool.
Hello and welcome again to the SME Growth Podcast. And it's Dave Parry here from Wellmeadow Limited. With me is Rich Buckle.
Hello.
Good morning, Rich. Good afternoon, Rich.
Good afternoon. Lunchtime, isn't it?
A bit later, yeah. If you hear the tummy's rumbling halfway through this episode.
I missed breakfast this morning, so
well, that's not good for you, is it?
It's not good.
Although, anyway, we're going to get into the whole
intermittent fasting.
Dietary advice, intermittent fasting. It's not what today's podcast is about. Now, we said we'd come back to this subject. I didn't look up the exact date of it, but I think it was about February we last covered this topic. And it's so fast moving that really we need to come back to it every 2-3 months or so. There's new stuff all the time. And it's the subject of AI, artificial intelligence, more specifically generative AI or Gen AI, which is what everybody's talking about ever since ChatGPT was launched on us unsuspecting public last November. And we're taking a particular angle on this. We could spend all day, as people do, talking about it. And we do want to cover a bit of the news, don't we, of what's happening of late, because it's in the news again.
Yep.
Well, it's always in the news. But we want to try and take a particular focus on how SMEs could and should be taking advantage of it. What should they be doing already if they're not? What are the risks?
Yep, absolutely.
That type of stuff.
So, it's something we're on a bit of a journey with, isn't it? Wellmeadow.
I think
we're
probably top 10% maybe of small companies using it, maybe even top 1%. I don't know.
Yeah, it's hard to tell, isn't it? Really, but but we like to try and I think we're increasingly incorporating AI into our working practices. Yeah, into our day-to-day life. I think I'm still, it's a rough guess, but maybe saving it an hour a day on, not every day, but over the course of a week, probably an hour a day in terms of
it's quite impressive
productivity saving from using
I'm
AI.
certainly saving time. It's hard to put a figure on it, I suppose, because it's starting to become a natural thing, almost like going to the internet and Googling for something. I've always got a window open for both of the main chat versions, ChatGPT and Bard. And it's definitely saving time. Saving time.
I think it's even becoming a bit more. So, I could tell a story about my daughter using it. That's kind of it's becoming, I wouldn't say ubiquitous, but it's much more common. And I was saying the day my daughter's applying to become head girl or whatever it is in her school, and they had to write a personal statement, which she then informed me that she wrote, and it was good, but she put it through ChatGPT, and before I was able to kind of proof it for her, she'd informed me she'd already sent it in.
Gone. Yeah, wow.
But you've got Americanized spellings in there, and there were things that you'd probably expect a 12-year-old to not quite say,
to articulate it.
But she prompted it to say it wasn't just rewrite this; it was rewrite it with a focus on leadership style. And so she'd actually engineered the prompt a little bit, which is why it came out as something that probably was a bit beyond.
But it's certainly got a style, hasn't it? Even when you ask it to adopt different styles, you can start to spot now when there's an AI.
Yeah, I think the American spellings are a very good giveaway, some of the language it uses. So in the end, what we decided to do was to actually send in the original piece of work to her teacher, because she'd already obviously sent the AI version in. to say, you told us about AI in an assembly, so I've used it to enhance my work, but the original ideas are my own.
Good save.
Wow.
But it just goes to show you got to credit ChatGPT where you're using it. I think it's going to catch people out if they don't, if they think this is just a shortcut.
Well, yeah, and that my point to her was that it's all well and good to use this to augment and enhance what you're doing, but what you want to show is that the original ideas were your own, not that you had AI. Because I said to her, look, I can get AI to give me the same ideas that you've come up with just by asking it the right questions. And how does your teacher know whether or not it's you that's come up with the ideas or the AI? So there is that kind of, what do they call it? Is it provenance or something? Or was it? There was a big word in the NFT community. Provenance, that's it. Provenance. To show that it's your idea and your IP.
You mentioned augment there as well, and we're going to mention in a minute an interview with Chris Young, who's head of strategy of Microsoft, who's very much banging on about that being the intended use of it, to augment, not to replace.
Yeah.
Well, I thought it'd be good, useful. So that's a good example of that, and we'll maybe come on to bits of that because it comes under the what it's useful for, but where the risks are. But I thought it might be useful to do a bit of a roundup of stuff we've both been reading and listening to in podcasts and just being aware of, because there's a lot of stuff going on at the moment. I mean, at the time of reading, it was headline, I think, yesterday on the BBC News, because the Prime Minister's advisor was suggesting that AI would have the power to kill millions of people within 2 years. So that's certainly a good headline-grabbing story, if ever there was one. Where enough that come from. And I think that was in the context of Sunak going across to America to speak to Biden, and they're trying to come up with some sort of initiative which will start a regulatory process of some sort.
So how is he imagining that it would kill millions of people?
Well, that's the first thing I searched for. How's he going to do it? And someone else asked me that as well. And his particular point was that it could help to create either cyber weapons or biological weapons, which, still needs a human.
So indirectly then, not kind of a Skynet.
Well, I don't think at the moment we've connected AI up to anything yet, I don't think anyway, that has the power to actually pull the metaphorical trigger. I guess once it starts driving cars for you, it could drive you all off a cliff or something, but it's, I don't think yet we've given it the control. We haven't given it the red button for the nuclear arsenal, have we?
That's like iRobots or something, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's where they take over.
But there was, and I wanted to come back on this because that really echoed a statement put out last week. So this is all sort of newish. It was put out by the Centre for AI Safety, which is an organisation, but it was co-signed by thousands of luminaries in the AI world, including the CEO of both OpenAI and Google's subsidiary, which is doing the same sort of AI work. And so it's got some weight. There's only 23 words to it. And I thought it was almost worth reading out for those that didn't pick it up. But the statement that was supported by, say, OpenAI, Google DeepMind and others was as follows: that mitigating the risk of extinction from AI should be a global priority alongside other societal scale risks such as pandemics and nuclear war. That's their study. That's their statement, 23 words. Now, I guess it's probably maybe they spent a long time crafting those 23 words, such a thing that everybody could put their name to. Doesn't go into great detail, but it's certainly a cry for giving it attention. And given it's the very people that have created this technology that are saying so.
Pandora's box. Have we opened it?
Definitely.
Are we lifting the lid? Peeking
it's well and truly lifted, surely.
I think one of the problems with trying to regulate this, I don't know if they'll be able to, because how are you going to limit, kind of Western, democracies or whatever, which most of this call for is call on regulations coming from, versus Russia, China. SME podcast gets political.
We've just been cut off.
We've just been
in China.
Been there, but they're not going to stop, are they? The Chinese aren't going to stop developing AI.
Well, it's
Russians
interesting. I've been recommended a book which I've just started reading, which is the history of the development of the atom bomb from pre-war. All the background to the physics, and then obviously the creation through the war and so on. And I'm drawing strong parallels with that. That once you've invented it, no matter what you try and do through all the START treaties and everything else to try and get the control over it, you can't.
Yeah.
And it's been done. Humans have done it. They've now created at least maybe 2 tools that can kill all of humanity at the press of a button. Nuclear bombs and now maybe AI. I don't know. We've not given it yet, as I say, the power to physically do it. But in that website, the Centre for AI Safety, they mention 4 specific risks, which they think are very real in terms of what it could do, maybe not to entirely destroy humanity within 2 years, which is what Matt Clifford, Sunak's advisor, said. But they list the 4 as being that it could be weaponized, such as drug discovery tools could be used to build chemical weapons. That's one risk. Another one is around misinformation. Now, given that we saw a lot of bots applying through both of the recent elections and our referendum and so on, and they've been accused of skewing democratic outcomes, then imagine if you could do that at scale in a very convincing way. So I guess that's one of the concerns. Another one is that it may not be democratized in the sense that not everybody would have equal access to it. So if it became more in the hands of the few rather than the many, then that's going to potentially create a conflict, because some people then get to use it for their benefits, whether it be rich countries or powerful people or whatever it may be. And the other one was more esoteric, really. It talks about the enfeeblement of humans. And I think this is a concern I've heard expressed elsewhere, that if we tend to rely on AI too much, we'll just stop thinking for ourselves.
Yeah.
And there was even a thought that given that AI, generative AI, is trained on example data that humans have created over the whole history of time, but as recorded on the internet, if we stop creating data and output of our own because we're using ChatGPT, it will run out of new stuff to teach itself on. So then there's a question of, can it create enough innovative content of its own that it can train itself on its own output? It needs some quality measure. You need to know whether what it produces is acceptable or not. And it's still learning, isn't it? But when does it get to the point where it can judge for itself whether what it's produced is good enough?
Well, it's like the, I think it was on Google Music, where you can get it to produce its own music now. So if you say, so rather than like, going to Spotify or Apple Music and saying, okay, I want to listen to some jazz, you can go to this AI generated music and it will say original composition of some, Danish jazz in the style of the 1950s or whatever. And it will give you the sax.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's when it almost,
Well, artists have certainly come up with lots of concerns about it because of its ability to create art. And we were talking earlier, weren't we, about the ability now of some of these tools like Midjourney to produce fantastic images. We don't need a photographer or an artist. It can just create it. Music is the same, as per the written word, which is where it started out. So the enfeeblement of humans, it's a real worry, isn't it? And I remember back when I was younger, I used to be able to remember people's phone numbers because you had to dial them.
Yeah.
And you don't anymore. And that's maybe a trivial example, but it just goes to show how what we regard as being important, we no longer bother remembering. And I used to have a road atlas in the car because I had to navigate places. But now I've got sat-nav. My memory for road numbers and where junctions are, I'm getting lazier. I just follow it, and digital natives have never had to do that. They just follow.
So every time I bring this up with my kids, they always quote back to some like Albert Einstein quote around like, if it's written down somewhere, why do I need to bother remembering it? And they're like, well, if Einstein said that, then like, oh great, okay. You still need to learn your times tables.
I think the bigger risk for us to worry about, given the scope of what we can do about it, is to be aware, make sure that you and your teams are aware of the more practical risks of it, rather than its ability to destroy humanity within 2 years, because not a lot we can do about that.
Yeah.
And they're probably more around the release of confidential data as people start playing with it. So if you wanted to give it a bunch of data and get it to analyze that for you, that's all very well and good, unless that data happens to be very confidential personal data or commercially sensitive data you've just released. It's all very good to try these things, but maybe just have a pep talk with your team to say that if you're going to use it, and you're welcome to, anonymize the data first. It's
an interesting point, isn't it? So there's I guess there's all these, Centre for AI and other bodies now starting to talk about policy around AI, but I wonder how many SMEs have an AI policy.
Yeah.
And is that worth thinking about? Like, what data can go into it? What can it be used for?
And lots of larger companies are developing this to the point where some of the very largest companies in the world have now got AI departments, and it's not just a spin-off of the IT department. It's there as a service to all the business units, and they're starting to look at how they can redesign their workflows.
Well,
what are their business processes?
Sure, I saw somewhere the other day that there was a prompt engineer job going, 6-figure salary for a prompt engineer.
And I've heard that talked about a lot, the prompt engineering. Now, maybe that in time doesn't become as necessary because there's so much intelligence around the prompting that the AI can work out what you really meant to say. But for now, you need to ask quite specifically, don't you? That's true. So I think there's certainly the problem around confidentiality in the release of that. I think another big risk is the hallucination problem. And that's what they call it when AI bots come up with a very plausible, convincing answer. It's just completely made up.
Yeah.
So it'll make up references, for example, for where it's got information from, or it'll make up information itself. So that can be very dangerous if you haven't yet internalized the fact that these things are just huge statistical models trained on massive amounts of language, and all they're doing is trying to work out what is the most likely next word in the answer. It doesn't have to be right. It just has to be the most likely word in the answer.
Yeah, I think there was somebody who recently tried to defend themselves in court using ChatGPT.
Right.
Maybe even been in a law firm that used it, and then they had this kind of like case references. I don't know, Brown versus whoever, and
it made one up,
and that's they quoted. So the judge is then, okay, well, what's the what happened in that case? And then they kind of went and looked at it, and ChatGPT just made up the case,
and it's like plausible to the uninitiated,
convincing. But when you dig into it, it's like this thing is there is no record in any actual kind of legal precedence that this case,
and it's been released without those checks and balances in place. And that's going to have to happen. I was talking to a senior partner in a law firm last week, and he agreed that the type of law which is around creating leases or conveyancing for a house purchase or doing wills, template stuff, shareholders agreements, that type of thing, that is definitely going to be much more easily replaced by AI.
Well, AI and blockchain.
Than high-end, and other technologies, than high-end advocacy and opinion, for sure. So lots to worry about that. So I think the confidentiality problem, the hallucination problem for sure. I think there's also a very real risk, not quite of, industrial unrest is maybe too strong a word, but industrial anxiety, where I think people in various jobs are going to start to get worried about whether their job is at risk because of this and be looking over their shoulder all the time. And I'm going to refer to a couple of interviews in a moment because I'd refer people to them if they want to find out more about it. But there's one thought that there's two types of mistakes that companies are making that are mutually exclusive. You're making either one or the other.
Yeah.
And either you've shut down all use of ChatGPT and Bard and everything else, and you've got a company policy not to allow it to be used because it's just potentially too dangerous and you don't want to go there. And we know organizations locally that have done exactly that. We know people who work in them. And I understand that that's a very risk-averse, safe position to take, apart from the fact that you're saying you don't trust your people very much and you're not giving them access to the latest tools. You're asking them to work with their hands tied behind the back compared to other people who are allowed to use it. So there's definitely a risk of avoiding, it's out there. It's like saying to people 20 years ago, you're not allowed to use the internet, King Canute stuff. And the other risk, which is almost at the opposite end of the spectrum, is where with completely unfettered access, no thoughts at all as to the risks, that you just let people use it however, and you don't train people or inform people. And I think one of the aspects of that is to make sure everyone realizes that if we do make a success, when we make a success of AI in our businesses, you have a choice. If productivity increases, productivity means doing more with less. So are you going to use it to do more, or are you going to use it to have less people doing? So you're going to cut jobs, or you can do more stuff.
Yeah.
And the advice certainly from those propagating the use of AI is you've got to continue to think about creating more value all the time. So let's say you could multiply your productivity by 10, and you've already saved an hour a day, even with fairly primitive AI tools compared to what they'll be in a few years' time. You're not having an hour off a day or cutting your week short by a day. You're doing a load more stuff. And not just doing more of the same, but thinking of other ways of adding value in more innovative methods or approaches. And that's what we've got to make sure everybody realizes is the likelihood of this. Okay, when certain industries were retired, let's say the mining industry in the UK or something, there was a short-term adjustment period where people had to retrain and they weren't jobs. But now we have a labour shortage, 1 million vacancies, and people just retrained into other things. So I'm relatively optimistic about this. I think there will be ever increasing amounts of work to be done that adds value. And if we get another tool that comes along that accelerates us so much, then great. But let's take control of it and be aware of it and be on the front foot and make sure that we use it to help us rather than be caught out by it because we're being very reactive.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? It gets philosophical quite quickly, doesn't it? In terms of what do you do with these tools? Which sectors are going to be hit hardest by this? I saw something the other day around somebody using AI to generate architectural plans and then using it to create the 3D model of the house that rendered, and then you could then I guess get it to do a bill of materials or something for you if you wanted to, and all of those sorts of things. And I think, well, that's architectural example. You've talked about the legal sector. Accounting could very much lend itself to AI.
The more it's trained on it, it still needs training, and it can only be trained on examples. Yeah.
So it's I think it's the professional services sector could be
for sure, especially if it's template driven.
Yeah.
Like maybe accountancy, but certainly some elements of the legal profession. Just in the way the internet fundamentally changed travel agency as a business model, and maybe even a state agency. That access to information being democratized is a good thing. You start expanding that now into an AI way of interpreting that, and then you're into a whole different.
But I think on that note, it's an interesting thing to think. Like, I guess I see a lot of stuff in my Instagram feeds and things like that around AI. And if you're reading around the subject again, your news feeds are going to come up with an AI. So you almost get this kind of this bias that's kind of built in, isn't it? Like kind of confirmation bias that AI is everywhere and it's ubiquitous and it's going to take over and it's going to happen, next week type of thing. Whereas sometimes I speak to clients or other people who aren't plugged into AI at all.
Yeah.
They're absolutely convinced this is a fad. AI is never going to take off. Nothing, it's just all something that everyone's getting hyped up about. And you think, okay, well, there's maybe something in that you can, overplay the speed at which this is going to hit the mainstream. And is this still... But I think that in and of itself then represents a great opportunity for SMEs to say, right, if you can get on the front foot of this, there's probably 5, maybe 10 years.
No, I think it's a lot faster.
You think?
Yeah, I said I was coming back to a couple of interviews I wanted to refer to. Yeah. And they're both from the Harvard Business Review podcast, which you don't have to be a subscriber to Harvard Business Review to listen to. They're publicly available. So go and have a listen. They've done a series during May of 4 different podcasts around AI. And they interviewed, the 2 most interesting interviews for me were Sundar Pichai, who's the CEO of Google, Alphabet, whatever. He was really interesting on it. And the other one was Chris Young, who's the head of strategy at Microsoft. And they were talking about the various different evolutions of their products that are coming up soon.
Yeah.
And Sundar Pichai said, think of this not just as important as when the internet came along and how that changed. Now, maybe he's overplaying this, but he said, think of this as like when fire came along or steam. Right. It's going to be that seismic a change to the way we work. And it's going to happen really, really fast. So it's hard to believe that reasonable access to the internet only started happening 20 to 25 years ago.
Yeah.
And there wasn't a lot on it anyway. That's a very short period of time. And look where we've come to now, with the billions of pages. So I think what we're seeing, that development will now happen in 2 or 3 years, that amount of improvement, but in the AI space.
Do you think they will become mainstream though?
In the same way the internet has. Yeah. And if you're interested in a book on this, then Ray Kurzweil's Point of Singularity addresses this problem. Right. He published that God knows how long ago. I remember Cloud Wells recommended it to us. And he set out to try and work out when in the future is the year that computers are able to match humans in every aspect of ability. And long and short of it, he came up with the year 2047. And the way he did that is to try and normalize the amount of progress that humans had made in each century and work out how much of the following century did they need to make an equivalent amount of advancement.
Right.
So he had to come up with how do you equivalence things like steam versus flying or something like that. And the broad rule of thumb he came up with is that every century's worth of improvement happened in the 20 years at the beginning of the following century.
Yeah.
And it was exponential because that 20 years then happened in the sort of 4 years remaining, and so on. So all of what happened in the 20th century has already happened in the 21st century in terms of progress. And bear in mind, the 20th century went from not even being able to fly or make a telephone call, right through to just about having a few mobile phones kicking about.
Well, I guess I was looking at something the other day on quantum computing is making particularly large strides at the moment.
Yeah, and Google are really investing a lot in that. They really sense that's going to be one of the big next things.
And there was talk of it being, almost like they're not quite there yet, I don't think, but that stage where the interface, like, because clearly most people aren't going to be able to own a quantum computer. They are, fairly specialized and massive pieces of equipment.
Well, that's what IBM said in the 60s too.
But the idea is that you would be able to kind of access that as kind of a SaaS. Here's my issue.
Yeah. Who wants a computer anymore anyway?
Use a quantum computer to be able to solve these things, which will do it. I mean, I don't know quite what the number is, but it's thousands, if not millions of times more processing power than a normal computer today.
What's crazy about that is no matter how fast that gets, we're still relying on cables that are on the seabed that the Russians can go along and snip with their submarines. There's going to be these points of frailty. Imagine if we get so dependent on using AI systems, just the same way we're all dependent on our mobile phones now, let's say, or the internet. As soon as that turns off, we'll turn into zombies staring into space.
Well, there was someone saying, something yesterday with an EMP in the UK, if an EMP strike happened, 90% of the population would be dead within 3 months.
Really?
Because it would just cripple everything.
It takes all the systems out.
Takes all the systems out, all the electricity.
Just because of electromagnetic
all of the
experience.
And then I was talking to someone else about this, saying how the nuclear, because as soon as you kill all the electricity, once the nuclear power station reactors backup power fails, all of those cores just overheat, and so
that's what we're worrying about in Ukraine.
So it's I guess. Yeah, it's all getting a little bit dystopian, this podcast, isn't it?
Well, it's just to bring it back a little bit. I want to do a quick roundup on the tech and where we're at. So Google have just announced the combination of DeepMind and Brain, which are their two organizations working on this. They've come together and they've unveiled their next big product called Gemini, which is designed to take on OpenAI's ChatGPT head on rather than Bard, which they've got at the moment. And when Sundar Pichai was asked what's going to be different about that then, two things. One, he's going to build in a lot more safeguards on it and try to be more responsible about quoting sources. But the main two technological improvements are, one is there'll be multimedia.
Right.
So rather than just text-based, it won't just be able to input video and images and maybe audio, but it'll be able to output them as well. So if you ask it to write an illustrated essay or write a PowerPoint presentation, it will also come up with images that go in it. AI generated as part of that, and maybe even a soundtrack of somebody talking about whatever. So that's one. But the other one, which I was much more excited by in a way, if it's used well, is that it will be programmed to make use of other tools, just like humans can.
Right.
So we've all got loads of other SaaS products available to us, whether it be a CRM product or project management tool or whatever, or tools out there that can convert JPEGs to PNGs and all that stuff. Then it will also be able to access those. So that suddenly becomes a very powerful prospect. Now he's hoping that that's going to come out in about October this year, and then we'll see where that goes. Bard is already there. Bard has recently changed to allow you to access the internet live, which ChatGPT 4 didn't do until recently. If you're a paid member, you can switch that on. So whereas you used to get responses all the time saying, I am an AI language model, I can't tell you that because I was trained up till September 21. Well, now it can access new stuff. So I typed in earlier our web address, wellmeadow.co.uk. What can you tell me about that company? And it told me an estimate of the number of employees, what we did. And so some of that you can say that's almost Google searchable. But then it said, what are our strengths and weaknesses? Well, we don't list our strengths and weaknesses on our website. It's inferred that from stuff, maybe comparing it with other things. So already we can get a bit of that. And interestingly, both it and ChatGPT are starting to put the source information against their responses. So it'll link you through to the website where it got most of its content from, if you're using the Bing bit.
And that's got some pretty powerful applications for either competitor monitoring or prospecting. Just what information could you get AI to serve up and give you insights?
Given this company XYZ Limited, tell me who are their competitors. Or if this is one of our top customers, tell me who else is like that customer in that region. You can see why GDPR is going to become ever more on focus here. If that's being used for personal data. Using it for companies, slightly different. So that's where they're at. ChatGPT, they've launched 4, obviously, that we talked about some time. 4.5 is in the pipeline, but not due until the autumn. So that'll probably come out at about the same time as this Genesis thing from DeepMind. And they're even talking about a ChatGPT 5, but wouldn't be till next year sometime. But bear in mind that when they rolled out 4 and they did the videos showing what it could be capable of, they very much banded around the use of image input. And that still isn't broadly available, only to the beta tester people. So we can't now use the chat interface for ChatGPT 4 and give it an image. But what I did try earlier, so it started getting there. If you give it the URL of an image, and say, tell me what this image is, it starts off by saying, I am a text-based large language model. I can't blah, blah, blah. And then it says, so I did it earlier on, and the URL I sent it was a picture of a broken egg. And then it says, after saying, I'm a large language model, I can't tell you anything about this, you need to go and have a look. It then says, but if this is a picture of a broken egg, I can tell you about the cholesterol content of eggs or what the shell's made of and blah, blah, blah. So I don't know why they've choked off. Clearly, it's made an inference that this might be a broken egg. But it's not telling me this is a broken egg on a black surface with one yolk and lighting, blah, blah, blah. So maybe that will come. It sounds like it's sort of almost there. It's just about how you prompt for it. So that's where we're at with all that. And I said we'd come back to the Chris Young interview, who's the head of strategy at Microsoft, because he's very much pushing this concept that we all need to regard AI as being a co-worker, augmenting you. And he said that in fact, Sundar Pichai said this as well to back up the point. They found that a pair of programmers work better than two programmers in isolation because they spar off each other and generate ideas. He said, imagine that's how you have ChatGPT sat by your side. So it's just someone else prompting you with ideas, brainstorming, correcting your English. And they talk about the fact that it brings, if you've got a range of abilities, it brings the lower end of knowledge workers up to at least the average, if not a bit above. So the improvement in your team could well not be that it's taking the most able and taking them further. It's bringing the lesser able ones up to a comparable level. So that's quite an interesting sociological point.
You could go so many places with this. Just in terms of, just it's almost like a quasi-employee, isn't it? Yeah. Having an artificial intelligence.
Well, it's something like a personal assistant with all sorts of power. So you give everybody a personal assistant.
But you would then just say, right, okay, read our office manual. Yeah. This is our office culture. This is our, SOPs. This is all of the stuff about our business. Yeah. Put that into the AI, train yourself off our information, and now be a personal coach to whoever's in the business.
Yeah.
And their role is this. So what would be the best development plan? You talk about applications. What would be the best development plan for someone in this role? Mm-hmm. There we go. You know our business. You know what we're talking about. You've seen our website. You've seen our, social media.
Imagine if it had access, you could give it access to your diary and your emails and whatever other databases you use, and just ask it, what's the most important thing that I do next?
Scheduling would be, that's that type of thing.
Or what's distracted me the most in the last week? Or what should I have done that I didn't do? Where am I failing as a leader? It can only tell based on what you train it with. But there's all sorts of augmentations. It's almost like the Iron Man suit for the worker. It still relies on your brain.
Well, I'm just thinking about that. I just showed you that clip of Humane, which is a spin-off, well, not spin-off, but there's a load of Apple employees who created this company called Humane, who are now creating a wearable device that is powered by AI, linked to AI. And I think they've done a TED talk recently or something on that and showed some of the capabilities. But just on that point, you could imagine something that you're wearing this device, it can see what you see, right? So it can see what's on your screen. It could analyze what you're looking at on the screen, compare that against, what your diary said you were going to do, and say, well, it looks like you were working on this piece of work, which isn't the same as what this was. And
I saw eBay.
Back to that distraction thing, or
well, even there must be countless occasions when you're trying to improve your management style all the time, and after a conversation, you think to yourself, I could have probably approached that a bit differently. Imagine if that was almost fed to you live. It's not far of a stretch, is it, to have an earpiece connected to this and have your AI assistant saying to you, don't forget to mention this, or don't go down that road, or don't forget this person has got sensitivity around that subject because of this other event.
Danger, Will Robinson.
Have you asked them about their holiday last weekend? So given the time we've got left, why don't we do just a quick reminder of maybe where companies could be implementing this? So what we've done so far is just a general update and a waffle on what's going on in the world of AI, because it's such big news. But there are still very practical things that SMEs can be doing.
I suppose the caveat here is that we're still on the journey with this, or starting the journey with this, aren't we? We're trying to implement some of these things and try out new technology. So we're just, if we go through what we're sort of working on at the moment. Yeah,
we've done some interesting things, and I would encourage other SMEs listening to this to come up with their own, maybe based on what we've done or others, and just get some people to try it. but do it in a reasonably structured way. Tell everybody what's going on. Make the point that we're learning. This isn't going to put people out of a job. It just allows us to do our jobs better and therefore do more of it. But try some of it.
I think picking up on a point that we made earlier about the policies around AI, after this podcast, I might get ChatGPT to write one for us.
Well, it's not a bad idea. What is our policy on it? We haven't said anything to the team yet about whether they can use ChatGPT or Bard, which of course we would let them do. We would encourage them to do it. But with what safeguards, what bumper guards do we put around that? We haven't told everybody that if you're going to upload data to get it analysed just to see if it can, you've got to anonymise the data. And that's sort of basic stuff. Don't reveal personal information. So you're right. We should write an AI policy. That's not a bad thing, maybe for all companies. In fact, if we do one, we'll refer to it in a future podcast and maybe put that on our resources page as an example. I don't know if other companies have got one yet. Be interesting to have a look around. We should ask around, shouldn't we, some clients. Have you got an AI policy?
AI policy.
We've got bring your own device policies and internet use policies, but this is a whole different order of things. So there's that. I think we're using it quite a lot for writing stuff, text-based output.
Yep.
I think I mentioned in our last podcast that I took an email that I'd received, put it into ChatGPT and asked for it to write a response, and it did. So that's kind of an easy one. You can get it to rework stuff you've done, but you feel you've done the wording a bit clumsily and you want it polished up a little bit. Be careful of those American spellings. And the style.
But I think it's experimenting with style. I think I did that. Well, it's this trivially jokey example, but somebody was quoting me in an article for a piece of work that we had done, and they wanted me to approve the quote. So I was like, okay, that's fine. But you could also try it as in a version that like Clint Eastwood would do. So I put what they'd said, put it into ChatGPT and said, give me an example of this as per Clint Eastwood. And then it did another one as Elon Musk, and it did another one as an 8th century monk from Shrewsbury Abbey. And they were all like, just to prove the point that it can take that one bit of text and change the style.
Yeah. So I think it's good to know what it can do. That reminds me of the 3 phases of AI so far since November last year, where to start with, we were playing with it. Yeah. Then we tried to break it, and now we're starting to use it.
Yeah.
And I think we're starting to get a bit more serious about it. It's not just a passing fad. We said 100 million people had signed up for it in the first 3 months. Well, it's over 500 million now. It's crazy. There's only 8 billion on the planet. How many of them have even got a computer? So it's quite scary, really. So we're starting to take it a bit more seriously. So writing text-based stuff. I heard about someone the other day creating a little automation loop using Zapier, which some listeners may know about, that links other systems together. And through their automated candidate management system, for dealing with job applicants, they were able to just click a button to say send a rejection letter to that candidate, and it composed the letter based on all the records that have been received so far, the CV, the scores the interviewers had given, or the assessment they'd given, anything that had been determined that far in the process. And then it wrote a reasonably comprehensive rejecting letter, which clearly wasn't a standardized Dear John template. And they said the amount of feedback they got, a very positive nature. Thank you for taking my application seriously, and I found your response letter very helpful for me, and all that sort of thing.
I wonder the GDPR implication of that, of taking somemost personal data and sticking it into an AI.
Well, that's back to your policy again, because if you're naive about it, you've just released that as it's now open source, right? And
almost
the
like
future language model is learning on it.
Saying as by applying for this job, you almost need some sort of policy statement in there around by submitting this form or applying for this role.
Well, I wouldn't have gone as far as automating the link through to ChatGPT on that. I would do, like we said earlier, anonymize the data. For candidate A, for job B, company C, this was the facts, and then you have to take that and put it in.
Yeah, some interesting implications there, isn't there?
And I was with someone last week who was planning a conference in the retail sector, and they tasked their team with coming up with some good ideas for plenary topics, so that after the main seminar, they could break out into breakout rooms and talk about these other subjects as well. And so I said, well, why haven't you used ChatGPT for that? And it was still newish, aware of it, of course, but not having used it. So I fired it up on my phone because I was out and about, gave it that problem statement, and then immediately produced a full running order for the conference. It's simple stuff, which we were talking about 3 or 4 months ago, that still people aren't using it for.
Well, and that's back to the kind of, that's a good example of how you can save an hour a day type of thing on average. Because,
well, that was going to save several team members maybe an hour a day.
So you've got, how long would it take to come up with all of those ideas? And get everybody coordinated on it and all of that.
And within a few seconds, you ask it then, give me 3 key questions to ask in each of these plenary sessions, and how do I prepare, so on. So you can save an awful lot of time.
Take an awful lot of that kind of ideation time out of the...
And make it better. Brainstorming, give me 10 ideas for this. Give me the top 10 issues around that, and build that into what you're doing.
Yeah.
Risk assessments, what are the most likely risks and mitigation factors when I'm running a business entering this new market? So it doesn't have to be right, as we said before, but it will give you prompts and you can turn half-right answers into
It's going to get you,
ones.
It's going to get you going.
Now, I think writing code, tell us about that, because we did an interesting project recently.
So we've done an interesting thing around this specific application. As many of our listeners will know, we're HubSpot partners, and so we have an interest in sort of finding other companies that are using HubSpot to offer our services. And so how do you do that kind of needle in a haystack type of thing? So one of the approaches we looked at was to come up with a way of writing some code to identify whether a website's using HubSpot or not.
Based on the tracking code.
Based on the tracking code that you get in HubSpot. Sort of similar to Google Analytics type code.
Yeah.
And so, we use ChatGPT to enable us to write that code, and then iterated that to get it to do certain bits and pieces that we wanted it to do, where to go and find the web addresses, what to do with them once it had found, what values to return, if it found that a website had a HubSpot link. And like something that probably 6 months ago, 12 months ago, you'd have had to get a developer to come and help you do.
Yeah.
It was sort of citizen coding, half a day or so of time. And
that's what amazed me about it, really. We don't, for everybody listening who doesn't know, we don't have coders, developers, software people on the team. And so we were able to do it without that. Yeah. ChatGPT was our augmented people. We had techie people maybe who can work their way around websites and things, but only like a lot of people can.
Yeah.
And then they managed to take the instructions given to us by ChatGPT, almost like assembling their IKEA wardrobe, and produce the finished product.
I think sort of rough numbers, I'd say that there's probably 15% of so we took our kind of contact database to look at, and probably 15% or so were HubSpot users. And of that, probably 7-8% we didn't know that they were. Obviously, some of them are clients and whatever. But so as a lead gen tactic using ChatGPT coding.
Now that exact example won't relate to everybody else. So I think the point you're making is that we constructed a problem statement into something that if only we had a programmer that could do this for us, and then thought, okay, well, let's see if ChatGPT can do it for us.
And that's the approach I'd encourage people to take with it, to say it's almost that kind of, if you had a magic wand, what would you do? And it's like, okay, if you go to ChatGPT and say, I don't know how to solve this problem, give me 10 ideas of how, or 5 ideas of how I could, find HubSpot companies, and then start just sort of riffing off that, as it were. And one of those might be, well, look for the tracking code. Okay, well, how would I find the tracking code? Well, you could write some Python to do that. Yeah. Okay,
but what do I do?
Write the Python
What's that
for me.
Mean? Where do I put that? And it'll tell you.
Yeah, how do I then implement this? And so...
And maybe on a more accessible level for some people listening, most people are familiar with Microsoft Excel. We mentioned that a couple of episodes ago, didn't we, talking about productivity tools? And most people know how to enter a formula, even if it's a fairly simple formula, like equals sum, A to C or whatever. We'll just ask ChatGPT to write a formula for you, and it can do some pretty clever stuff. Say, I just want to know how many of those data items on the left have got this word in, when that can, just construct it in natural language, your problem, and it will come up with a formula for you.
That's it.
Now, you can't quite link spreadsheets as a data source yet, but you can input the data into the prompt.
Yeah.
So ChatGPT 4, if you're on that, it takes 25,000 words. So that's quite a lot. So you can cut and paste a fairly big section of a spreadsheet, paste it in, make sure you've anonymized it all first so that you don't mind. Paste it in there. And I did this earlier with some of our deal data, all suitably anonymized, and just asked it what are the major influences. And it said, well, it looks like the more times that you have a sales activity with a customer, the higher chance of it closing a deal successfully. Well, fancy that.
Yeah.
Maybe a trivial answer, but it worked it out.
Yeah.
And you can get it to analyze correlations and so on. It gives you the chance of something being better or worse based on something else you're doing. So we're still at the foothills, really, of exploring how to use it responsibly for data analysis. But imagine you just put in company accounts every month, anonymized again, and say, what can you tell me? What are the key top 3 things we should be talking about this month based on that set of management information. And it should, probably do no more, I would imagine, than if we put it through a spreadsheet and looked for the major variances ourselves. But it'll do it that quicker.
Yeah.
And it may, if you're really clever about it and you gave it historical information, it may say, oh, and this happened last April as well.
Yeah.
And that would be pretty clever. So we can do more with that.
Absolutely. And you could, I suppose the other thing with that is that if you put that company data in, you could say, right, give me the results as though I'm a, senior qualified accountant. What would I be looking for? Or give me the results as a, just sales director, or give me, what have I got to, and that's the kind of power it can have in terms of what that, you'll get a very different response.
Yeah, sure. And if it had access to other accounts, don't forget, as AI evolves, you'll be able to privately train it. So apparently ChatGPT is already coming up with a potential option of a privacy mode, where you're going to be able to create prompts that it doesn't allow to go into its repository for future training data. So it helps to solve some of these confidentiality concerns. But you'll also be able to have the function to train it on your own data, which won't go out of your organization.
Right.
And this is already happening in some cases for some of the advanced users, like on legal databases. So if you trained it on all of your own, let's say, financial information over the last 10 years, then nobody else would get access to it.
Yeah.
And then it could say, the last time this happened, 6 months later, that happened.
Yeah.
Or this happened and we found it was this last time. You can, it will just have perfect recall and the ability to draw correlations at a speed, and you wouldn't have time to do it yourself. So that's all in the future. But for now, I think the top tip, as talked about when I was saying about these interviews earlier on, and Chris Young was saying this from Microsoft, the head of strategy there, he said the best tactic for SMEs is just start to use it. Just try something. Just get familiar with the fact of it can do stuff. And then as further advances come out and it's built into other products, you'll be less frightened of it.
Yeah. Give it a go.
More to follow on this. I think this could well be at least a quarterly update, maybe on our own journey and what we're doing with it.
Well, if we're here next quarter, by the sounds of it.
We've got 2 years.
It's all right. By the sounds of it could be.
No, Matt Clifford, the Sunak's advisor, said we've got 2 years till humanity is
to
destroyed.
ChatGPT and say, if I was a prepper, what should I be? Give me a checklist. Beans.
Dear me.
Don't even get me started.
Don't get with your bunker.
I'm a wannabe prepper.
Tons of beans in the kitchen. Okay, so we'll do that in about 3 months' time then. We'll give an update on any further developments we've made using various AI tools, and another update on what's happened in the world of AI.
Very good.
Interesting though. Thanks for your input on that. Good. So once again, you've been listening to the SME Growth Podcast, and thanks for listening all the way through. You've done well to get this far through us waffling on about AI. As ever, we ask you to share the fact that we're doing this podcast on a range of topics, and please share that with other friends and contacts you have in business. I know we aim it for the SME market, but I'm sure businesses from startup to PLCs can get something of value out of what we're talking about. If you could subscribe to us on the various podcast outlets that you see, click the notifications button, and I know several of you are listening every week as soon as the podcast drops. So thank you very much for your support. Good luck with your businesses.